Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another episode of the Art of Intervention Project. And the goal of this is to create a broad scope picture of what are interventions, why are they important, how effective are they, how do they work? And so I'm really blessed to have Tim Ryan on the call today and or on Zoom. We're doing video here. And just to connect on his story a little bit and why he got into this, but also like what are interventions and how do they work? But there's a reason, Tim, that you got into this, and I want to give people kind of a scope too. Of like, I mean, Tim's been doing these for a while, but he's a sought after speaker. He does interventions all over the country, all over the world. You know, he's been on A&E's Dope Man. He's wrote his book, author from Hope to Dope, and
Dope to
recently
hope.
Dope to Hope. Dope to Hope. Hey,
Dyslexia kicking in.
it totally is. It totally is. And recently on the doctors, and just you're doing a lot of amazing things. And I know there's a reason why you do interventions. And so can you kind of draw people into your story a little bit on why you care?
Just a quick story, 2 minutes. I grew up in Northern Illinois, came from a great family, but I was a kid that struggled with addiction from 14 years old on: alcohol, cocaine, hallucinogenics, you name it. But my first time in treatment was 21. I white knuckled it for a year and went in and out and relocated and started more businesses. But the thing was, I was very successful at what I did. And I ultimately ended up in the high technology space. I own 3 executive search firms. I worked in the management consulting space, but I was human resources' worst nightmare because I was the hardest worker, but I was always drinking, doing cocaine, whatever. I ultimately was about 14 months clean, going to meetings, took a guy to Chicago to move out of his apartment, and his roommate was doing heroin. Yeah, I'll try a bag. That took me down another 12-year road of utter hell and destruction. At the peak of my addiction, I had an office in the Wrigley Building, Michigan Avenue, downtown Chicago, making high 6 figures, and had a $500 a day heroin habit. I overdosed while driving, hit 2 cars, put 4 people in the hospital, and ultimately was sentenced to 7 years in prison on October 30th of 2012. When I walked into prison, I was married at the time, 4 kids. I left my wife with the house in foreclosure, no money, no nothing. But I needed to go to prison. Prison saved my life. And in Illinois, there's 28 prisons. At the time, there was 2 with therapeutic drug treatment programs, and I got into Sheridan Prison. And my cellmate was a former Chicago gang chief, Big Perk, for 25 years. He had spent 23 years behind the wall. And all we did in that cell was recovery. Studied the big book, went through the steps, the NA basic texts, tried to understand the Bible. I still don't comprehend that. Read hundreds of books. We wrote the business plan for the nonprofit I still run today, a Man Recovery Foundation, in that cell. And I got out of prison, and my wife had divorced me, lost our home in foreclosure. My oldest son was in active addiction, and I plugged into recovery, got a sponsor for 2.5 years, never missed a meeting, and started some family support groups where I'd have the family come with the person struggling at the same time. And I had 5 of these going, and I set up my nonprofit. And then on my 21-month sobriety date, my 20-year-old son, Nicholas, died from an accidental drug overdose. And I knew when we got to the hospital, when the chaplain walked out, he was dead. And I'll ask people, what was my next thought? And they'll say, like, you wanted to use. No, my next thought was, I'll go to a meeting. And that's what I did that night. And my son's passing, he kind of solidified what I do today. And it was game on. And I, stumbled into working in the treatment space, started doing interventions, started speaking. And then, A&E came knocking at my door, and we had the documentary Dope Man and Steve Harvey show and Lisa Ling and Nancy Grace and you name it. I've been on every show possible, but I just want to help people. I don't want people having to go to prison to get sober. I don't want parents to lose a child. 2 weeks after my son died, my former wife and I were having lunch, and she looked at me and she had said something to the effect of, like, Tim, I want you to keep doing what you're doing. When I met Shannon, Nick was 3, and I adopted him, and we had 3 other kids. She said, I truly believe God put Nick and I in your life for a reason. Had you go through your struggles, had Nick go through his, for Nick to pass on to set the stage for what you're going to do next. She said, the past 30 years have been your training ground, and the doors have opened, and it's just game on. But, you know, the interesting thing is, too, once I got sober, I stumbled into another relationship and got her pregnant and had a daughter. And Mackenzie is the pride and joy of my life. But for 5.5 years, all I did was give. And trying to save the world, which you can't do. But I needed to take a step back and really focus on me. And then Jennifer Jimenez came into my life almost a year ago. And when I met Jennifer, you know, she's a supermodel, a celebrity in Sober House and Celebrity Rehab. And she helped start all this stuff. Nobody was talking about this when this came out. And we were talking about speaking and doing this. And when I met her, we fell in love, and we've been together ever since. And now we've got our hands in all sorts of things. But I finally found out what true love is, unconditional love, our true purpose, and game on. Let's go have some fun doing what we're doing.
Yeah, it isn't amazing. And a couple of things you said too. It's like, you know, found your purpose and all those things. It was kind of like God was doing for you what you couldn't do for yourself.
Amen.
And
Absolutely.
Going to prison really turned this
Prison,
amazing pathway for you.
Prison saved my life. And I speak in that prison now. I speak in prisons all over the country. The warden's a really good friend of mine, but I needed to be sat down, and it was God's time out for me. And I had two choices in prison. You know, I wasn't there to do push-ups for noodles and get swole. I was there to change. And I took that time to reflect and work on the inside. And I mean, I was at the library every week checking out 5 books and just studying and reading Cosmic Energy, Karmic Healing, you know, Napoleon Hill, Tony Robbins, you name it. I studied it and built my foundation there.
Good for you. Way to turn things around in a positive way. And even though you've been on all these shows, all this stuff, you're such a humble guy. You walk in humility, and I see that. And I just want to thank you for that, because there's
you know, it's cool that I get the opportunity to be on Varney and Company or Martha McCullough and Fox and Friends, but it's just an avenue to get a message out there.
Right.
And what I try to let people know is, look, if I can turn my life around, November 1st, I just had 7 years sober, and it was a milestone. It's like, man, I'm 7 years sober, and I couldn't stay sober 5 minutes, let alone 5 days. And you know, for me, this 12-step program gave me the life I was always searching for. And my life now is about giving back. It's as simple as that. That's why people are like, oh, you make all this money. And no, I really don't. You know, it's, all right, can I afford to get this plane ticket? But I don't care. It's I got a roof over my head, clothes on the back, food on the table, and I have a purpose, and I wouldn't change anything.
Yeah, cool. Well, you're definitely doing it. So, well, I'm excited to dive in. Thanks for sharing your story too, and getting vulnerable with that too. I mean, it's probably stirred up a lot of things for people. So I always want to throw this out too. Like, so everything you do, like, how do people get in touch with you? And then we're going to dive into kind of interventions and stuff, but how would people reach out to you to go the proper channels of connecting with you to engage in a conversation with you?
I mean, I'm all over social media. So I'm still with my foundation. I stepped off as executive director of a Man in Recovery Foundation. We guide and direct indigent people into treatment, www.amirf.org, or they can call me, 844-611-HOPE, 844-611-4673, or shoot me an email at tryan@amirf.org. But you can find me on Twitter, A Man in Recovery, or Instagram, Facebook, Tim Ryan, Dope to Hope. I had a lady call me yesterday, and I think I talked to her like 4 years ago. She said, yeah, I just went to Google and typed in your name and your phone number's there. I'm very accessible, and that's what people, and I'll pick up the phone and people are like, is this Tim? I'm like, yeah, who'd you think's going to answer? And, you know, I answer all my Facebook messages or whatever. So it gets overwhelming, but I like that personal touch.
Yeah, well, you're very good at that too. So, all right. So the Art of Intervention project we're talking about here now, I think when people think of the word intervention, they think of the A&E show intervention. I think that's what people think a lot. But what would you describe, like, what is an actual intervention when families call it? What are they expecting when they call, you think?
Well, first, it's educating the family on what really is entailed with doing an intervention. It was I had such a good training ground because I worked with a lady who actually had helped write the DSM-5. She was a high-end clinician, and she taught me the ropes, and we do interventions together. And then when we had a team of people in Illinois, we had 8 or 10 people. Every day we were doing 2 or 3. But a lot of them were people that had nothing or getting them out of trap houses or whatever. And then it started escalating to really families calling. But the first thing is getting the family on board, because they're either divorced or mom's the enabler, dad's not. And for me, the main thing is really getting the family on board and understanding, for me, when I walk into a house, 2 things are going to happen. A, the person's going to treatment with me, or I'll help them pack a bag and I'll take them to a homeless shelter. But I've got to get the family on board first, because if my analogy is, if you baby them, you're going to bury them.
That's a powerful statement right there.
Well, and I take this from a lot of things I do are personal experience, and I have great mentors, Brad Lamb, Bob Merrier, and I've worked with Bob and some of these doing some very intricate interventions. But I look at my 20-year-old son that passed away. When I got out of prison, I had a little townhouse, and my former wife and 4 kids were living with Shannon's grandmother, my former mother-in-law. And my daughter at the time was 11, and she called and said, "Dad, you got to get Nick out of the house." I was doing laundry, and I found a big pile of heroin on the washing machine. And I use the analogy, if my daughter would have been carrying laundry and set a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on that pile of heroin, threw her laundry and ate that sandwich, it would have killed her. So my mother-in-law is like, "Well, I can't kick him out." And I said, "Look, he has a roof over his head, clothes on the back, food on the table. He can come and go as he wants. He can take your car, sneak it out, take your credit cards. He has no reason to change." I wouldn't change either.
Yeah.
And then, it was getting his mom on board. And then, Nick had been to treatment 5 times. He knew how to do treatment, but Nick didn't know how to stay sober. And I learned from the passing of my own son. He got out of treatment. 30 days later, he's in jail, did 45 days. His mom picked him up, took him to lunch, fed him, and said, "We're done." He was dead 7 days later, and he had snorted 2 bags of heroin, native-bar Xanax. But there's so many other factors involved. The friends knew he was OD and didn't do anything, and blah, blah, blah. And I blame the disease of addiction, but it's telling it the way it is, too. I mean, this is, especially when you're dealing with meth and opiates and, alcohol. I mean, people tend to forget alcohol's the #1 killer out there. It's not opiates. It's not benzos. It's alcohol. So getting the family on board first and really having that plan of action on, because I get a lot of calls from people that don't have resources, no insurance or state insurance or an HMO or a PPO. So you've got to have treatment set up and know exactly what I'm doing prior to walking in.
Yeah.
And I can't believe, some of the people out here, I've had people be like calling me saying, "Well, I just did this intervention. Where do I go with this person?" I'm like, "What?
Yeah.
You went and did an intervention and you don't have treatment set up and aftercare?" And so one main thing I like to do, though, is if I'm putting Johnny, Susie, Bob, Frank, or Mark into treatment, I want to get the parents' help too. Because if the family doesn't get better, the person struggling's not. And a lot of times I don't want them going back home because the family's not willing to get any help. And if I take someone and put them in a 30, 60, or 90-day program and they come back to that same toxic environment, chances are they're going to fail.
Yeah. And they're coming out of addiction and going back into the same environment. So
Absolutely.
everyone's got their addiction. And so we look at like addiction, we look at recovery in this process, right? And so, like, I know people will call sometimes and say, "Hey, I think my loved one has an addiction problem. What do you think?" So do you have like a simple kind of definition for addiction?
Well,
or an idea?
I look at it and I just ask some simple questions. Well, A, why would you say that? And very quickly it's they're not working or they're spending all their money. But what I see today, I'm 51 years old. I've been working since I was 10 years old. I left to go to college at 17, and in the summers you worked and made money. And this enabling generation where I'm seeing people that are 25, 35 still living at home, and mom and dad pay for the cell phone and the car. And it's like, we need to take these things away, but it's real simple. A few questions: what's really going on? Why do you think? And if it's causing consequences, because I have seen people that 18 to 25, they might have been involved in something, and for them it was truly a phase. But that's not for me to decide. That's for a clinical team to decide. And I think what happens is you get a lot of, I shouldn't say this, I have no clinical background whatsoever. I hold 2 PhDs, and one is in pain and one's in cardiology. But that's why I usually have someone on call or with me that can really decipher that, or I'll have them speak with the family from a clinical side so we know what's going on, because then you're not only dealing with the substance abuse, there's usually some type of mental health, and then the underlying trauma. And when I'm doing this and making sure I want somebody to go to treatment once and get the right, treatment and work on everything versus a revolving door, because again, learning lessons. My son had been to treatment 5 or 6 times. I always had great insurance, so I sent him to the local center, and he'd do 3 weeks. And if I would have known what I knew back then, I would have had him on a plane. I would have put him in California or Florida at the time in a 90-day minimum program and get him in a structured sober living for a year. Or I use a place called Oaks Recovery in South Carolina for men, which is a AA Big Book boot camp for 4 months, and no cell phones, and you work and pay your own way. And they're working the steps, because a lot of people can do treatment. They have no concept of what live in recovery is. So there's so many facets involved in trying to get everybody on board.
Yeah, definitely. My wife always used to say that one of her counselor friends that she knew said addiction is the inability to deal with emotional pain, right? So we mask
everyone is masking some form of trauma. And I'll go back to 4 years ago. A clinician friend of mine took me to an event in Chicago, and there was 300 clinical people and probably 10 people like me. And Dr. Gabor Mate was speaking. And when I heard him speak, and if you haven't seen his videos, watch his video on YouTube about addiction. And he says, to me, you can throw choices and disease out the window. It all has to do with trauma. It's either emotional loss, mental, spiritual, physical, or sexual, and we're masking the pain. And I looked at my life and said, I don't have any trauma. Being adopted, older brother that beat me up every day, learning disabilities, molested by a babysitter. Yeah, I guess I do. I have trauma, and drugs and alcohol became my solution.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and there's freedom in working through that too. And so people get into recovery, right? And they think recovery is this, hey, I went to a program, I'm in recovery now. And so going forward in people's lives, we talk about like aftercare and sober living, and like what really is recovery, because it doesn't matter how long we've been sober, right? I mean,
It's funny. Somebody had a meme on social media about being clean. And I had commented, well, there's a difference between being clean and being in recovery. And somebody said, well, what do you mean? And I said, look, someone can quit doing something, heroin, alcohol, and they're clean. But there's such a difference to truly living recovery, and I've seen people do it just through changing eating and working out, changing your friends. But I don't care if you do 12-step based, Christian based, refuge recovery, smart recovery, just see a therapist and a life coach. I need to change on what's going on the inside. Jennifer will say, I always look shiny and pretty on the outside, but I had this void on the inside. That's what you really got to work on. And as I explain, lifestyle is a way of life. It's not just going to meetings. Anyone can do that. And when I'll speak at treatment centers or recovery events or whatever, I'll ask people, how long you been on step 4? Well, 6 months. We'll fire your sponsor.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally.
the whole reason you go through a 12-step based program is so you can take somebody else through the steps. That's a miracle. And yes, you're going to work on all these other variables, but people are like, do you go to meetings? Yeah, I still go to 3-4 meetings a week. You know, I have a sponsor. Right now, I don't sponsor people because I have so many things going on and it's a disservice to them. But I'm in the middle of that circle and my tribe is really small. And the thing is, you can choose who you want. But I can remember at 21, going to treatment and saying, hey, go to meetings. I went to meetings. I'd put my hand up and say, I'm looking for a sponsor. Nobody pick on me. I'd be like, yes, I got away with it again. I thought I could get sober through osmosis.
Right.
And sometimes people want a candy coat. I tell it the way it is. And people either like me or don't. And I don't care. I don't want you to die. And here's what we can offer you to get on the road.
Yeah, good. You kind of staying in your lane and not venturing out where you're not. That's not your expertise.
And I know I get many calls toward this. No, this is out of my league, and you know I'll refer it out. And I know what I can do, and I know what I can't do. Unfortunately, a lot of people, especially with this whole social media thing, you see people and they're doing an online intervention course and they're going in. And I had this one guy, it's like, well, I'm with this mom and a daughter. I said, what do you mean? You're by yourself doing an intervention with a mom and a daughter? Well, yeah. I said, you should have a female with you. You know, it's frustrating. Yeah. It's really frustrating, but I got to work on what I do and not worry about other people.
Yeah. Well, and that's why we're doing this project here, is because I want people to hear these different things that something will stick with them, right? And new interventionist, old interventionist, families looking for an interventionist, something to get that kind of help. And we walk the family through these processes. Like the phone call comes in, we talk about the addiction, we talk about what does recovery look like. And then one of the big things I always like talk about too is like talking about the transformation of people's lives. Like you can look at you and you're definitely a transformed guy, but the idea of transformation, I think, is aloof to a lot of people. And I think that's the key, is to being a transformed person, right? So
absolutely. And you know what I do a lot, by you know, people like we had talked earlier look at TV and okay, well, Johnny's or Susie's been doing all these things, and we're going to get them in a room and we're going to sit down and read letters and they're going to go to treatment, kumbaya. It doesn't work that way, you know, not at all. And I hate to say it, but I was a garbage can. I've probably done every drug there is to do. I've made millions. I've lost millions. I've done blue collar work, this, that. I was a competitive water skier. I can usually find connection with any individual, and I just share my story and I find common ground with them, because I'll know other interventionists that won't talk about their background. And I'm an open book, and a lot of times I walked in, Jennifer and I were in Pennsylvania doing some speaking events 3 months ago, and we couldn't get to Florida due to the hurricane, so we're going to drive to Chicago to see my kids. And we got a phone call and drove 10 hours to Indianapolis, did this to do an intervention and talk to the parents at night, met with them again in the morning. And when I go into the house, I wake up the daughter and she comes downstairs and goes, oh, hey, Tim, I know you. I said, how do you know me? She said, oh, when I was in jail, I read your book. Boom, common ground. But the hook was, she was at, yeah. But then when Jennifer got alone with her, the mask came down, the tears, the fear came up, and, you know, it ended up going really well and put her out in a 90-day program. And, you know, but that's why I never do these things alone. You know, you got to have a team of people with you, and you got to know what you can do and what you can't do.
Right. Yeah.
And educate. You know, I try to connect the families with a therapist, or at least go to Al-Anon or Families Anonymous. But what I really recommend is you go to this week-long program at Betty Ford, which is a families program, or some of these other programs. And when your loved one's in treatment, go to the family programs on the weekend. Get involved, because a lot of times I have a harder time working with the family than the person struggling. They're like, yep, let's go, cat's out of the bag. But it's trying to get the family on board, because there's a lot of anger and blame, especially with multiple kids, and all the focus has been focused on Tim, the kid's struggling, and the other kids are neglected, and getting everyone help. That's a key factor.
Yeah, I totally agreed on that for sure.
The huge dance, man.
Yeah, it is.
Every scenario is different.
And people will often say, or to you, that you get the questions like, well, they're the problem.
Right.
Why do I need to do the work? Well, they're the problem.
Yep. And trying to educate, and sometimes you get through and many times you don't, because they're just not willing to change.
Yeah.
And then you'll get the loved one that's in treatment or going into sober living. They're like, you know what? I don't want to go home. My family's toxic. Hey, now you're seeing the light. And,
Yeah.
I don't want to blame anyone, but, people are like, well, for whatever reason, somebody tried something and unleashed a monster. It's as simple as that. And I don't like pointing fingers and, they got this disease, call it what you want. And here's what we can do to lay the tools and spiritual tools and all these other tools at your feet. And I tell them, I'll give you a tray. Every opportunity's there. It's what you want to pick and choose and do. And unfortunately today with the fentanyl and the opiates and the mix and benzos and everything, people die, and then they want to blame treatment and blame everybody else. It's crazy. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah. It's easy to point instead of take responsibility. So how did you get trained to do interventions? Like someone that's out there, even watching this is,
I had a couple very high-end clinicians, master levels that I worked with for 2 years. Do I technically arise interventions or any of these certifications? No, but I was mentored and worked hand in hand for 2 years with two of the best in the business. And have connected with a lot of people, and I watch and I sit and learn, and I sit second chair and see how this one operates and see how this one operates. And I take what works for me, because you could teach 10 people the Bible, and 10 people are going to be preachers. Well, each preacher is going to do it differently, and how they connect and how they talk scripture. Well, I don't know why I'm using this analogy, because I don't read the Bible, but anyhow, and it's doing what works for you. And what else I did, being in the technology space as a headhunter for 23 years, I've interviewed 10,000 people. I applied a lot of those skills and training into what I do today. Dale Carnegie, Zig Ziglar, these trainings I did before, and just kind of pick and choose and go from there.
Yeah, we're dealing with human dysfunction, right? And I'll hear some people will say, well, I got trained and I only do things this way. But we're dealing with calling audibles halfway through the intervention, in the middle of it, at the end of it, and just meeting people where they are and encouraging them that there is hope beyond all of this struggle.
It's interesting. About 8 months ago, Jennifer and I were in West Palm Beach, Florida, and we were driving down to Miami for a meeting, and one of her friends on social media who manages a bunch of bands messaged her and said, hey, I'm in Delray Beach and my sister's struggling. And I told Jen, get the address. And we drove right to the house. We met with the parents and the one sister. Then the one struggling came over, and it was a dance. And I happened to, at the time, work for a treatment center there, and she agreed to go, and a van picked her up and took her right to detox, and kumbaya. And she's still sober to this day. 2 days later, Jennifer was doing a one-person show in Miami, and her friend and her friend's mom came down to see her and said, we need to tell you something. And she's like, what? She said, well, my parents have video cameras in the house, and they videotaped everything you and Tim did. And it's unbelievable. You're good cop, you're bad cop. The dance you guys did, I've never seen anything like this. And that's expanded us into other opportunities just from doing that,
Oh, that's pretty awesome. Like you said, meeting people where they are, being you, being real, just being there for people is such a gift.
Absolutely. So, and I mean, my longest one, I think, has taken 18 hours. My quickest one is in and out 20 minutes. A kid's packing a bag, let's go. Yeah. And I one that was really interesting, I had done in the cornfields of Illinois. And it was a little 3-bedroom house, and the gentleman was 58 years old, and he had saw my show Dope Man a year prior. And he was excited to meet me, and he goes in his bedroom and he pulls out a 5-gram rock of heroin. He's like, Tim Ryan, this is my best friend, and he's snorting heroin. And 6 hours later, he agrees to go to treatment. Well, I met him the next day at the private airport and flew him to treatment in his Learjet. And I'm on this Learjet with this guy, and he's just crying. And I said, look, you make $50 million a year, and your best friend is a drug dealer that brings you a 5-gram rock of heroin every 2 days, and it's just disheartening. And he couldn't grasp it until about an hour and a half in that, his life was controlled by Xanax, Oxycontin, heroin, and alcohol. And he had all these things, but he was the loneliest person in the world. That's addiction, man.
Yeah, it is. The opposite of addiction is addiction is isolation, right? The opposite of it is connection. So what, in general, not specifically kind of like what you do, but like families that are wanting to get help, what advice would you give them is like trying to find an interventionist to help them in this process?
A lot of it is word of mouth for me, and the problem is a lot of people just jump on Google and do a search. And I tell people, even I work in the treatment space too. So I usually am always working as a, employee of a treatment center, but 8 out of 10 people don't go there because they're not a fit. But I tell people, do your homework, talk to 3 interventionists, and don't base it just on price. Do it on the one you feel comfortable with. Ask for references. And it's the same thing when I'll talk to someone about going to treatment, and if they're a fit, well, here's what I offer, but here's 2 other places or 3. Look at all of them. Ask to talk to the clinical director. Do they have an addictionologist? Do they have a psychiatrist? Boom. And do your homework. And a lot of people don't do that, and they need to be educated on who's coming in to help them and be real honest. I tell every family, look, I can walk in here and chances are it can go sideways, and they're not going, and everyone's going to get angry. And how are we going to deal with that? There's been other, like in Illinois, where I'm originally from, I live out in Los Angeles now. Kids got smart. And I say kids because if I'm doing an intervention with a 25-year-old living at mom and dad's, you can't kick them out of the house. If they get mail there, you can't kick them out. So there has literally been scenarios where I've had to send mom and dad to the courthouse to get an eviction notice. It takes 30 days. We'll go and do the intervention, and then the kid will pull that, and I'll pull out, oh, no, actually, you have a eviction notice, so we can call the police now, and they can come help you. And treatment doesn't sound like a bad idea. So it's knowing the states you're in, what's available, what's not, because I get a majority of my calls are people that don't have any resources. They can't even afford an interventionist. And on a lot of the interventions I did, I was able to do at no cost because I was working for a center that paid my salary. We had the nonprofit, and we still do. But it got to the point to where, I can't just hop on a plane and fly to Billings, Montana on my own dollar, and trying to connect people with resources and using people like you to, hey, who's here? Who can do this? What's available? And go from there.
Yeah. And I know people like,
yeah, go ahead.
No, we're saying knowledge is what?
Knowledge is power, man.
Yeah, it totally is. And I know when people hear this, because I dealt with this when I was working with the treatment center, also doing interventions. How do you navigate that water when people will say, well, Tim, you're just going to send them to the treatment center that you work for? So talk to people about how you balance that.
It's funny because I don't. And, I'll go do an intervention and send somebody to XYZ treatment center because I want them to get the best quality care possible. And, they can talk to my, but I can tell real quick, no, they're not going to be a fit, or this person is, has mental health issues, and not just crying or depression. They're possibly high-end bipolar or schizophrenic. They can't come to me.
Yeah.
So I know who to call. I'll call my buddy Tom Mazel and say, hey, who do you recommend? And here's 3 great programs. And I lay it out there, but you're always going to get people, especially we get a lot of hate because I'm with the supermodel, a celebrity, an actress. And I actually had people, because with my nonprofit, I've never taken a salary. We have no employees. Last year we brought in 178,000. We gave away 158, and that's paying to get people in a program for $1,000 or paying for their first 30 days in the sober home. But I actually would have people say, well, you run a nonprofit to make money to put people in your treatment center. my treatment center is $45,000 a month cash pay. Are you out of your tree?
Right. Yeah.
But, and it's given people options. And here's where I work, and here's why I won't tie my name. And I made it a bad mistake once, and 6 weeks later, I went in and quit. But I'm dealing with people's lives here. So I can't just say, here's one option, here's three. Talk to our staff, talk to them and see where you feel comfortable. Because taking someone in Illinois, treatment is, 3 to 4 weeks. Or if I can put them in a detox, res, PHP, IOP structured, California, they could get 90 days. So where do you think they're going to have a better chance? 3 weeks or 90 days? And do you want to go to a program that is a master level clinician and a bunch of KDACs or CADCs running group? Or do you want to go to a program that has all master level clinicians and 3 PhDs and addictionologists? I think that's where I'd rather go.
Yeah, and that's a good lead into like questions people should ask about treatment centers. Like, what makes a treatment center a good treatment center?
Well, and so I'm also an advisor to a company called Rehabcom. And Rehabcom is the only transparent website where you can find treatment that is not owned by a treatment center. And I'll tell a lot of families to go there, because you can go to any state and type in state insurance, Medicaid, HMO, PPO, and it will tell you. But I said, go through and look. Everybody says they're dual diagnosis or co-occurring disorder. They're not, and having a true mental health program versus substance abuse and a little mental health. And it's taken the time to explain all this. And it can be a half hour. It can be some of these families I've spent, 50 hours on the phone with for free. Other ones, it's like, I'll do that first call, but my time is valuable now. And if you want my knowledge and my expertise, you're going to pay for it. It's as simple as that. And, I have bills to pay. I have kids to feed and colleges to pay for and everything else. But giving them options and helping them navigate how to really see what's out there and do their due diligence. Get on the phone and ask questions. If you call admissions and they won't hook you up with the clinical director to talk to them, I don't think I'd want to go there. Yeah. Because there's 30,000 treatment centers nationwide. There's probably 50 good ones. That's it.
Yeah. And that's the thing. You're saving people time. I mean, it really is saving people time, because you've been out in the field. You know what's good, what's bad. We've seen one shut down, one's open, one's shut down.
With my speaking, I've probably walked into over 500 treatment centers nationwide, because I'll go into a town. We're going to Indiana, Jennifer and I, not next week, the following week, to Shelbyville. So we're going to speak in a high school, but then we're going to speak at a local treatment center, go into the county jail and do a community event at night. But I like to go into communities and go into centers to speak. So I can give a message of hope, but I can see how they operate, and I can ask questions. Well, what's available here if somebody doesn't have insurance or they have state insurance? What's a way to get in? Because even like in Illinois, they passed a new law. If you have state insurance and I go to treatment or I go to detox and I get out and I relapse, I can't go back to treatment for 90 days. Won't take you.
Wow.
Yeah. And people are dying. So there's so many facets involved in. And then people want to blame me. It's like, look, I didn't make the laws. Talk to your senators, your state reps, and get involved with them. And I can't fix every problem. I just guide and direct. That's all I do. I guide and direct.
A massive resource right here for sure.
Yep.
Are you going to see Mickey? And I got sober in Fort Wayne, Indiana, is where I got sober.
Awesome.
Back in 2001. So I'm a Midwest boy myself. So I'm, always scouring for options and stuff back in that area too. So in regards to, let's say a couple of kind of like end things, like someone, they go through the intervention process, you've had the meeting, you sit down with a loved one, they're like, I ain't going anywhere. I'm not going there. How do you guide the family after that? It says, I'm not going to treatment. I'm not going to an inpatient. What other options, like how can they proceed from there?
Well, a lot of it is based on the situation up front. Is the loved one living at home? Are they on their own? Usually the family is enabling in some way, shape, or form. And I tell them, we got to pull the carpet out, and your phone shut off, your car's taken away, you're not working for your father's company anymore. Because it's real simple. Three things are going to happen. You're going to go get help and get sober. You're going to die, or you're going to end up in the prison system. It is as simple as that. Make your choice. Do what you want to do. I rarely have people not go. I think I've had 12 people not go to treatment, and 3 of them are dead, and eventually they might call back, and it's just, hey, they might not be ready, and let them experience some more pain, and it's heart-wrenching and everything, but I want the families to get well and get into Al-Anon and get into therapy, because everyone, well, it's my fault. No, it's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. No one gave you a book. Here, we're going to have kids, and here's how to raise them. But if you keep doing these things, or paying his electric bill, or wiring him money for gas to get to work, you're enabling the disease. And we need to take that away. And usually 2 to 3 to 4 weeks later, they're calling saying, you know what, I want to go now. Or they get caught in jail. And then they're saying, hey, can you get me out of jail? Let them sit for a few weeks, then we'll work on it.
Yeah. So the intervention, it's a process.
1000%. It's the dance of dances, and it's you never know what's going to go happen. Things can go sideways, and they can be real easy. And I've walked into ones in my mind going, this is going to be a cakewalk, and it's been the most difficult one ever. Or I'm walking into one and looking at this guy who's 6'6" and 400 pounds, all muscle, going, this isn't going to work. And within 20 minutes, he's crying like a baby saying, yeah, I want help.
Yeah.
And it's getting them to put their hand up and finding common ground and planting the seeds. And, if they're saying, I'll give them a copy of my book and say, here, why don't you just read this and see if there's any similarities, and see if you have any of the pain I have. And here's my number. And if you want help, I'm there for you. Yeah. And just letting them know, I don't go, I see people, you can't yell at people. You can't, it's all calm and talking and working and following them around a little bit. And, it's cool. Yeah. But it hurts when the ones won't get the help and the pain in the families, but it's letting them know that up front. This isn't, we're dealing with a monster here.
Yeah, we definitely are.
Because what happens is, we get the calls when people are in that crisis situation, and it's trying to get them to look for the signs prior to the crisis happening that they're reaching out and guiding and directing them prior to, this is what's happening, or they're in the hospital or whatever. I can't tell you how many hospitals I've walked into and doing an intervention right in the hospital.
Yeah.
That's a great place to do it, because chances are they don't have any game left in them.
Yeah. So relationships with just professionals is huge. So just
Absolutely.
answer. So I've kind of a last question I want you to answer, because this is big for people that call guys like you and me doing interventions and entering this. But Tim, if I really do that, if I do what you're suggesting, it's all suggestions, right? Do what you want. But if I do that and they're not living here, and I can't call them because I cut their phone off, like if I do all these things, he's gonna die, and then I'm gonna feel guilty because he died. Like how do I deal with that?
Great scenario. So I'll use. I started a Heroin Anonymous meeting 6 years ago. And 2 weeks later, a kid walks in and says, I take benzos. Can I come to your meeting? I said, absolutely. 2 weeks later, a mother walks in with their daughter and said, I hear you operate differently. Can I sit in on your meeting? I had an epiphany. I said, let's have the family members come with the person struggling at the same time. So about 3 years ago, I would split the group and put the loved ones in one room and work with the people struggling. And you can come, hi, I don't care, I'll meet you where you're at. So there's about 80 parents, and this mother says, you need to quit picking on me. I need to assess you. And I said, ma'am, you got me effed up. I said, you need to assess me. I said, what we need to assess is how quick we're leaving this meeting and getting to your house and doing an intervention with your son, because you've told me twice in the past week he's OD'd in his bedroom. And we actually went to the house, did the intervention, got the kid on a plane. He's still sober to this day. But what I explained to the families is most people are going to die at home. While you're sleeping and they're up in their bedroom getting high, that's when they're going to die. And taking the phone away and things like this cuts off their communication to their drug dealer, to their sources. And I tell families, if Johnny or Susie leave, that doesn't mean you can't go have lunch with them once a week. And I love you, I just don't love the addiction you're in. And when you're willing to get help, we can bring you back into graces. But families usually have other kids and other things going on. And, you know, I share the story of my own son, you know, and his mom was like, well, if I wouldn't have told him he can't come home and he would have come home, he would have lived. I said, no, he wouldn't have. I said, because a week later, he still would have went to that party. He still would have snorted heroin and ate Xanax, and he still would have died, whether he lived at home or didn't. So blame the disease of addiction. But yeah, that's what I tell them, you know. But if you keep babying them, you will bury them. And I can say, you know, it cost me $25,000 to bury my own son. So what do you want to do? That's the reality of it. And people real talk, and the truth hurts, but I'm not trying to say it to be mean. I'm trying to do it to expand you, to be like, we have to do something now.
Yeah. If nothing changes, nothing changes, right?
Amen.
All right. So last words of encouragement to people that are watching and just, they've, watched all the way through. They're at that moment, and it's just like, okay, I can't pick the phone up. Just how are you going to encourage people to just do that?
You know what? I was driven by fear my entire life. The hardest thing for anyone to do is this. I need some help. Just put your hand up and ask. Message one of us through Facebook or through social media or through Twitter. I'll tell people, I'm talking to you on the phone. I can't jump through the phone. Pardon me. Sometimes people just need someone to believe in them. And that's what I do. Because I've been there. You've been there.
Yeah, most definitely. So we want to just encourage y'all to reach out for help. Thanks for tuning in today to the Art of Intervention Project. Tim, keep up the amazing work with you and your wife, and we'll see you somewhere down the road. So,
amen, my brother. Have a blessed day.
All right.